Okay. We are reading The Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams, Chapter 18. The main reception foyer was almost empty, but Ford, nevertheless, weaved his way through it. Zaphod grasped him firmly by the arm and maneuvered him into a cubicle standing to one side of the entrance hall. "What are we going to do?" asked Arthur. "Sobering him up," said Zaphod, and pushed a coin into a slot. Lights flashed, gases swirled. "Hi," said Ford, stepping out a moment later. "Where are we going?" "Down to the parking lot. Come on." "What about the personal time teleports?" said Ford. "Get us straight back to the Heart of Gold." "Yeah, but I've cooled on that ship. Zarniwoop could have it. I don't want to play his games. Let's see what we can find." A Sirius Cybernetics Corporation Happy Vertical People Transporter took them down deep into the substrata beneath the restaurant. They were glad to see it had been vandalized and didn't try to make them happy as well as take them down. At the bottom of the shaft, the elevator doors opened and a blast of cold, stale air hit them. The first thing they saw on leaving the elevator was a long concrete wall with over 50 doors in it, offering laboratory facilities for all of 50 major life forms. Nonetheless, like every parking lot in the galaxy throughout the entire history of parking lots, this parking lot smelled predominantly of impatience. They turned a corner and found themselves on a moving catwalk that traversed a vast, cavernous space that stretched off into the dim distance. It was divided off into bays, each of which contained a spaceship belonging to one of the diners upstairs. Some smallish and utilitarian mass-produced models, other vast, shining limo ships, the playthings of the very rich. Zaphod's eyes sparkled with something that may or may not have been avarice as he passed over them. In fact, it's best to be clear on this point. Avarice is definitely what it was. "There he is," said Trillian. "Marvin, down there." They looked where she was pointing. Dimly, they could see a small metal figure listlessly rubbing a small rag on one remote corner of a giant silver sun cruiser. At short intervals along the moving catwalk, wide, transparent tubes led down to floor level. Zaphod stepped off the catwalk into one of these and floated gently downward. The others followed. Thinking back to this later, Arthur Dent thought it was the single most enjoyable experience of his travels in the galaxy. My cat is snoring really loud. "Hey, Marvin," said Zaphod, striding up over toward him. "Hey, kid, are we pleased to see you?" Marvin turned, and insofar as it is possible for a totally inert metal face to look reproachful, this is what it did. "No, you're not," he said. "No one ever is." "Suit yourself," said Zaphod, and turned away to ogle the ships. Ford went with him. Only Trillian and Arthur actually went up to Marvin. "No, really, we are," said Trillian, and patted him in a way that he disliked intensely. "Hanging around waiting for us all this time? 3,579 years, said Marvin. I counted them. "Well, here we are now," said Trillian, feeling quite correctly in Marvin's view that it was a slightly foolish thing to say. "The first 10 million years were the worst," said Marvin. "And the second 10 million years, they were the worst too. The third 10 million, I didn't enjoy at all. After that, I went into a bit of a decline. He paused just long enough to make them feel they ought to say something, and then interrupted. It's the people you meet in this job that really get you down, he said, and paused again. Trillian cleared her throat. Is it? The best conversation I had was over 40 million years ago, continued Marvin. Again the pause. Oh, and that was with a coffee machine. He waited. You don't like talking to me, do you? Said Marvin, in a low, desolate tone. Trillian talked to Arthur instead. Farther down the chamber, Ford Prefect had found something of which he very much liked the look. Several such things, in fact. Zaphod, he said. Just look at some of these little star trolleys. Zaphod looked and liked. The craft they were looking at was in fact pretty small, but extraordinary, in a very much a rich kid's toy. It was not much to look at. It resembled nothing so much as a paper dart, about 20 feet long, made of thin but tough metal foil. At the rear end was a small horizontal two-man cockpit. It had a tiny charm drive engine, which was not capable of moving it at any great speed. The thing it did, however, have was a heat sink. The heat sink had a mass of some 2,000 billion tons and was contained within a black hole mounted in an electromagnetic field situated halfway along the length of the ship. And this heat sink enabled the craft to be maneuvered to within a few miles of a yellow sun, there to catch and ride the solar flares that burst out of its surface. Flare riding is one of the most exotic and exhilarating sports in existence, and those who can dare and afford to do it are among the most ionized men in the galaxy. It is also, of course, stupefyingly dangerous. Those who don't die riding invariably die of sexual exhaustion at one of the Daedalus Club's Après Flares parties. Ford and Zaphod looked and passed on. And this baby, said Ford, the tangerine star buggy with the black sunblasters. Again, the star buggy was a small ship. A totally misnamed one, in fact, because the one thing it couldn't manage was interstellar distances, because it was a sporty planet hopper dolled up to look like something it wasn't. Nice lines, though. They passed on. The next one was a big one, and 30 yards long, a coach limo ship, and obviously designed with one aim in mind, that of making the beholder sick with envy. The paintwork and accessory detail clearly said, I am also rich enough not to take it seriously. It was wonderfully hideous. Just look at it, said Zaphod. Multi-cluster quark drive, Perspulex running boards, gotta be a Laszlo Larrikin custom job. He examined every inch. Yes, he said. Look, the infrapink lizard emblem on the neutrino cowling. Laser's trademark. The man had no shame. I was passed by one of these mothers once, out by the Axel Nebula, said Ford. I was going flat out, and this thing just strolled past me, a star drive hardly ticking over. Just incredible. Zaphod whistled appreciatively. 10 seconds later, said Ford, it smashed straight into the third moon of Jaglin Beta. Yeah, right? Amazing looking ship, though. Looks like a fish, moves like a fish, steers like a cow. Ford looked round the other side. Hey, come see, he called out. There's a big mural painted on the side of this, a bursting sun. Disaster area's trademark. This must be Hot Black's ship. Lucky old bugger. They do this terrible song, which ends up with a stunt ship crashing into the sun. Meant to be an amazing spectacle. Expensive in stunt ships, though. Zaphod's attention, however, was elsewhere. His attention was riveted on the ship standing next to Hot Black Desiato's limo. His mouth hung open. That, he said, is really bad for the eyes. Ford looked. He, too, stood astonished. It was a ship of classic, simple design, like a flattened salmon, 20 yards long, very clean, very sleek. There was just one remarkable thing about it. It's so black, said Ford Prefect. You can hardly make out its shape. Light just seems to fall into it. Zaphod said nothing. He had simply fallen in love. The blackness of it was so extreme that it was almost impossible to tell how close you were standing to it. Your eyes just slide off it, said Ford in wonder. It was an emotional moment. He bit his lip. Zaphod moved forward to it, slowly, like a man possessed, or, more accurately, like a man who wanted to possess. His hand reached out to stroke it. His hand stopped. His hand reached out to stroke it again. His hand stopped again. Come and feel this surface, he said in a hushed voice. Ford put his hand out to feel it. His hand stopped. You can't, he said. See? Said Zaphod. It's just totally frictionless. This must be one mother of a mover. He turned to look at Ford seriously. At least one of his heads did. The other stayed gazing in awe at the ship. What do you reckon, Ford? He said. You mean, Ford looked over his shoulder. You mean stroll off with it? You think we should? No, nor do I, but we're going to, aren't we? How can we not? They gazed a little longer until, But we're going to, aren't we? How can we not? They gazed a little longer till Zaphod suddenly pulled himself together. We better shift soon, he said. Zaphod suddenly pulled himself together. We better shift soon. Zaphod, said Ford. Yeah? How do we do it? Simple, said Zaphod. He turned. Marvin! He called. Slowly, laboriously, and with a million little clanking and creaking noises that he had learned to simulate, Marvin turned round to answer the summons. Come on over here, said Zaphod. We've got a job for you. Marvin trudged towards them. I won't enjoy it, he said. Yes, you will, enthused Zaphod. There's a whole new life stretching out ahead of you. Oh, no, not another one. Will you shut up and listen? Hissed Zaphod. This time, there's going to be excitement and adventure and really wild things. Sounds awful, said Marvin. Marvin! All I'm trying to ask you, I suppose you want me to open this spaceship for you. What? Yeah, that's right, said Zaphod jumpily. He was keeping at least 3 eyes on the entrance. Time was short. Well, I wish you'd just tell me rather than try to engage my enthusiasm, said Marvin, because I haven't got one. He walked up on the ship, touched it, and a hatchway swung open. Ford and Zaphod stared at the opening. Don't mention it, said Marvin. Oh, you didn't. He trudged away again. Arthur and Trillian clustered around. What's happening? Asked Ford. Look at this, said Ford. Look at the interior of this ship. Weirder and weirder, breathed Zaphod. It's black, said Ford. Everything in it is totally black. In the restaurant, things were fast approaching the moment after which there wouldn't be any more moments. All eyes were fixed on the dome, other than those of Hot Black Desiato's bodyguard, which were looking intently. At Hot Black Desiato, and those of Hot Black Desiato himself, which the bodyguard had closed out of respect. The bodyguard leaned forward over the table. Had Hot Black Desiato been alive, he probably would have deemed this a good moment to lean back, or even go for a short walk. His bodyguard was not a man who improved with proximity. On account of his unfortunate condition, however, Hot Black Desiato remained totally inert. Mr. Desiato, sir, whispered the bodyguard. Whenever he spoke, it looked as if the muscles on either side of his mouth were clamoring over each other to get out of the way. Mr. Desiato, can you hear me? Hot Black Desiato, quite naturally, said nothing. Hot Black, hissed the bodyguard. Again, quite naturally, Hot Black Desiato did not reply. Supernaturally, however, he did. On the table in front of him, a wine glass rattled, and a fork rose an inch or so and tapped against the glass. It settled on the table again. The bodyguard gave a satisfied grunt. It's time we were going, Mr. Desiato, muttered the bodyguard. Don't want to get caught up in the rush, not in your condition. You want to get to the next gig, nice and relaxed. There was a really big audience for it, one of the best. Kakrafoon. 576,002 million years ago. Had you been looking forward to it? The fork rose again, paused, waggled in a non-committal sort of way, and dropped again. Oh, come on, said the bodyguard. It's going to have been great. You knocked him cold. The bodyguard would have given Dr. Dan Street Mentioner an apocalyptic attack. The black ship The black ship going into the sun always gets 'em. And the new one's a beauty. Be real sorry to see it go. If we get on down there, I'll set the black ship autopilot and we'll cruise off in the limo, okay? The fork tapped once in agreement, and the glass of wine mysteriously emptied itself. The bodyguard wheeled Hot Black Desiato's chair out of the restaurant. And now, cried Max from the center of the stage, the moment you've all been waiting for. He flung his arms into the air. Behind him, the band went into a frenzy of percussion and rolling synthachords. Max had argued with them about this, but they had claimed it was in their contract. That's what they would do. His agent would have to sort it out. The skies begin to boil, he cried. Nature collapses into the screaming void. In 20 seconds' time, the universe itself will be at an end. See where the light of infinity bursts in upon us. The hideous fury of destruction blazed about them, and at that moment, A still small trumpet sounded as from an infinite distance. Max's eyes swiveled round to glare at the band. None of them seemed to be playing a trumpet. Suddenly, a wisp of smoke was swirling and shimmering over the stage next to him. The trumpet was joined by more trumpets. Over 500 times Max had done this show, and nothing like this had ever happened before. He drew back in alarm from the swirling smoke, and as he did so, a figure slowly materialized inside. The figure of an ancient man, bearded, robed, and wreathed in light. In his eyes were stars, and on his brow a golden crown. "What's this?" whispered Max, wild-eyed. "What's happening?" At the back of the restaurant, the stony-faced party from the Church of the Second Coming of the great prophet Zarquan leaped ecstatically to their feet, chanting and crying. Max blinked in amazement. He threw up his arms to the audience. "A big hand, please, ladies and gentlemen," he hollered, "for the great prophet Zarquan! He has come! Zarquan has come again!" Thunderous applause broke out as Max strode across the stage and handed his microphone to the prophet. Zarquan coughed. He peered round at the assembled gathering. The stars in his eyes twinkled uneasily. He handled the microphone with confusion. He said. "Hello? Look, I'm sorry I'm a bit late. I've had the most ghastly time. All sorts of things cropping up at the last moment." He seemed nervous of the expectant, awed hush. He cleared his throat. How are we for time?" he said. "Have I got just a min—" And so, the universe ended. And that, my darlings, is the end of chapter 18.